All right, everyone. Welcome back to Crypto Brain. Right now, an extremely interesting discussion is beginning to gain momentum across the crypto market, and even seasoned investors are starting to pay very close attention. Over the past few hours, a new narrative surrounding XRP has been spreading rapidly throughout social media, investor circles, and institutional discussions. What makes this particularly fascinating is that, somewhat unexpectedly, the name Michael Saylor has also found its way into the conversation. Now, to be absolutely clear, this is not about Michael Saylor suddenly endorsing XRP, nor is it about any official announcement. The real story is much deeper than that. The question investors are asking is simple. Why is the XRP community suddenly becoming so active, and why does it feel as though the broader market narrative may be starting to shift? For years, institutional capital has overwhelmingly favored Bitcoin. Whenever a major corporation, hedge fund, family office, or asset manager entered the digital asset space, Bitcoin was almost always the first destination. It became the benchmark asset, the reserve asset, and for many institutions, the safest way to gain exposure to crypto. However, what investors are beginning to notice now is that the conversation appears to be evolving. Increasingly, discussions are moving beyond simple store-of-value arguments and into areas such as tokenization, stablecoins, cross-border payments, treasury management, digital liquidity networks, and financial infrastructure. And when those conversations begin, XRP often finds itself at the center of the debate. What makes this development so important is that institutions are no longer looking at blockchain technology solely through the lens of investment returns. Instead, they are trying to understand how value will move across the financial system over the next decade. How will assets be transferred? How will settlements be processed? How will liquidity flow between different markets and jurisdictions? And perhaps most importantly, which networks will provide the infrastructure required to support that future? These questions are becoming increasingly important, and many XRP supporters argue that this is precisely where the XRP ledger begins to stand out. According to its supporters, the XRP ledger offers something that many traditional financial institutions are actively searching for: fast settlement speeds, relatively low transaction costs, and the ability to move value across borders efficiently. Whether one agrees with that thesis or not, it is difficult to ignore the fact that the discussion is gaining traction. Investors are beginning to realize that the future winners in crypto may not necessarily be determined solely by popularity or community size. They may instead be determined by utility, adoption, and integration into real-world financial systems. At the same time, Ripple continues to expand its ecosystem in ways that many market participants find noteworthy. The company is involved in areas such as custody solutions, stablecoin development, tokenization services, payments infrastructure, institutional liquidity products, and broader enterprise solutions. For many analysts, this does not look like the strategy of a company focused purely on speculative market cycles. Rather, it resembles the strategy of an organization attempting to position itself within the infrastructure layer of the future digital economy. This is one of the primary reasons why the XRP narrative has remained surprisingly resilient over the years. While critics often focus on short-term price action, supporters tend to focus on long-term adoption and infrastructure development. They argue that if tokenized assets, digital payments, and stablecoins continue to expand globally, then settlement networks capable of supporting those systems could become increasingly valuable. In that scenario, the underlying infrastructure may matter just as much as the assets themselves. And this is where the broader market discussion becomes particularly interesting. Increasingly, investors are beginning to compare two very different visions for the future of digital assets. On one side is the store-of-value narrative, where Bitcoin serves as digital gold and a long-term reserve asset. On the other side is the utility-driven narrative, where blockchain networks are judged by their ability to facilitate payments, settlements, tokenization, and financial operations. These two narratives are not necessarily competing, but they do represent different ways of thinking about the future of crypto. This is one reason why Michael Saylor's name continues to appear in discussions involving XRP, despite his well-known association with Bitcoin. Market participants are constantly comparing these competing visions. Every interview, every statement, and every institutional development is analyzed through the lens of what it means for the future of digital finance. Investors are trying to identify not only which assets may perform well, but which technologies are most likely to play meaningful roles in the evolving financial landscape. History also teaches us an important lesson about markets. In many cases, narratives begin to shift before prices do. First, conversations change. Then attention follows. After that, capital begins moving. This pattern has repeated itself countless times across different asset classes, and many traders believe crypto markets are no exception. That is why increasing numbers of investors are closely watching XRP over the coming days. They are not necessarily reacting to a single event. Rather, they are paying attention to a collection of signals that, when viewed together, appear to suggest growing momentum. This brings us to the discussion surrounding a potential 24-hour breakout. Whenever traders begin talking about short-term breakout scenarios, opinions naturally become divided. Some believe momentum is building and that a significant move could be approaching. Others argue that markets still require additional confirmation. The reality is that no one knows with certainty what will happen next. However, what is undeniable is that XRP has once again become a major topic of conversation, and that alone has attracted considerable attention from traders and investors alike. What makes the current environment particularly fascinating is that the conversation around XRP feels noticeably different from previous cycles. A few years ago, discussions were dominated almost entirely by price targets and speculation. Today, however, conversations increasingly revolve around infrastructure, liquidity, tokenization, stablecoins, institutional adoption, and the future architecture of financial systems. Whether one is bullish or bearish on XRP, it is difficult to deny that the nature of the discussion has evolved significantly, and perhaps that is the most important takeaway of all. Markets are ultimately driven by narratives, and narratives are driven by expectations about the future. Right now, many investors appear to believe that the future of finance will involve far more than simply holding digital assets. They believe it will involve moving value instantly, settling transactions efficiently, tokenizing real-world assets, and creating new forms of financial infrastructure. If that vision proves accurate, then the networks supporting those functions could become increasingly important over time. As always, none of this should be interpreted as financial advice. The cryptocurrency market remains highly volatile, and no outcome is guaranteed. Always conduct your own research, manage risk carefully, and make decisions based on your own financial circumstances. However, one thing is becoming increasingly difficult to ignore. The conversation surrounding XRP is once again growing louder. Institutions continue exploring blockchain-based financial infrastructure, and investors are paying closer attention than they have in quite some time. If you enjoyed the video, be sure to leave a like, subscribe to the channel, and share your thoughts in the comments below. Do you believe XRP is preparing for a major breakout, or do you think the market is still underestimating the broader institutional narrative? I would genuinely love to hear your perspective. Thank you very much for watching. It is always an honor. I'm Crypto Brain, and I'll see you in the next one.